Today is October, and we're having Ray McGovern with us.
Thanks, Nima.
And let's get started, Ray, with what's going on between Iran and Israel. And here is Lebanese Foreign Minister recent interview with Christian Amanpour talking about the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah.
Iran fired on Israel, I spoke with Lebanon's Foreign Minister Abdullah Abu Habib, who's in Washington to meet with American officials, and he joined us for his first interview since the latest escalations. Foreign Minister, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Things have reached a major crisis in your country since we last spoke. And I want to ask you, you are in the United States right now. You know that several of the administration officials agree with Israel's, ground incursion into your country. What do you make of that as you're in Washington trying to get support for a ceasefire?
Well, they also agreed on the Biden Macron statement that calls for a ceasefire, and that calls also the implementation for 21 days ceasefire, and then Mr. Hochstein would go to Lebanon and negotiate a ceasefire. Okay, and they told us that Mr. Netanyahu agreed on this, and so we also got the agreement of Hezbollah on that. And you know what happened since then? That was the day we saw you in New York.
I know, and you were talking about going into the Security Council for this ceasefire, and barely 24 hours later, the head of Hezbollah was assassinated. Are you saying Hassan Nasrallah had agreed to a ceasefire just moments before he was assassinated?
He agreed, yes. We agreed completely. Lebanon agreed to ceasefire, but consulting with the Hezbollah. The speaker, Mr. Berry, consulted with Hezbollah, and we informed the Americans and the French that what happened. And they told us that Mr. Netanyahu also agreed on the statement that was issued by both presidents.
Okay, well, as you know, Mr. Netanyahu...
Yeah, Ray, it's unbelievable. And they're talking about ceasefire. Hassan Nasrallah is agreeing on ceasefire. And then Netanyahu assassinated him. What we can learn from this?
Well, this is not the first time. This seems to be Netanyahu's modus operandi. After all, Haniya was the chief negotiator from Hamas, and he was assassinated. So when things get a little hot, you just kill off whoever you want to, and it looks very, very clear here from that interview that at least the Lebanese foreign minister is assuring Christian Amanpour, for Pete's sake, that not only Lebanon, but Hezbollah had agreed to it. Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, and then, as you point out, he's killed by many 2,000-pound bombs. I don't know if you've seen the explosions, Nima, but they are immense. They remind me of atomic explosions out in New Mexico when they were developing the atomic bomb. So they want to make sure he was dead, and they did. And Netanyahu comes into the UN at that same time when he gave that order, and he tells the rest of the world, look, we can do what we want. We're going to do what we want, and just don't believe anything else, because we have the high cards here. We can destroy anybody we want, even people whom we're negotiating with. Now, of course, the big question, Nima, as you know, is how can he be so confident? I mean, it's 7-front war. Killing Nasrallah, who was very, very popular, not only in Hezbollah, but around the Shia world, or the whole Islamic world. Well, it comes down to whether he fully expects the U.S. to support him, Netanyahu. Israel, well, he governs Israel, but in my information, the Israeli army is very reluctant to go very deep into Lebanon. They remember what happened last time. Okay, so the question is, will Biden say the right things to Netanyahu? He seems to be trying to do that right now. But who else will say the wrong things? Who else will encourage Netanyahu to start a war with Iran, if at all possible? There are people within our government precisely fitting that description. And the final thing here is, let's say Biden talks to Netanyahu and he says, look, I'm serious this time. You're believing this time I'm serious? Then the question is, will Netanyahu believe him? Because Netanyahu has Biden wrapped around his little finger. He's got him mesmerized. Now, I use those quotations because they come from 2005, when General Brent Scowcroft, National Security Advisor to Reagan and Bush and Ford, okay, what he said as head of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, given that position by Bush Jr., what he said after the war started in Iraq, and after Scowcroft was persuaded, as I was, even then, that Israel had a big, big hand in making sure that happened. He said that Ariel Sharon, prime minister in those days, Netanyahu's forerunner, okay, he went to the Financial Times in London, for God's sake, okay? Now, you got to realize, Scowcroft was the epitome of discretion. He would never leak anything that he wanted to leak. He would never say anything that he didn't really rehearse saying. So he rehearsed this, and he said to the Financial Times, it was September 2005, if memory serves, look, the problem is this. Ariel Sharon has President Bush, the younger, wrapped around his little finger. He's got him mesmerized. Now, why did Scowcroft do that? Well, because that's what he knew had happened with respect to Iraq, and he wanted to tell the rest of the world and the U.S. citizenry, look, you're being had. The Israelis are running your policy, okay? Again, Scowcroft, the master of discretion, wants us to know that. Now, what happened? Didn't make any difference at all. We continued our invasion of Iraq and trying to subdue it. And, a million people died because of that. But Scowcroft at least had enough of a conscience to say, the American people need to know that the Israeli prime minister is calling the shots. And it's all because of the political situation in the United States, not only people in administrations of one kind or another, but also in Congress. As some people put it, we have the best Congress that money can buy, and there's lots of money buying Congress people and senators from AIPAC and other parts of the Israel lobby. So what I'm saying here is that this is it's really come to the fore right now. Biden, as I understand it this morning, is making the right sounds. Others are probably saying, don't pay any attention to Biden. It's a month now. A month before the election. He won't have any other option other than to support you full bore if you get involved in a war, a wider war in Lebanon, and if Iran, there are a lot of people in the administration who would just as soon choose this opportunity to make a war with Iran. Whether Iran will cooperate on that, I don't think they will. They're smarter than that, okay? But that doesn't mean that the U.S. and Israel, certain portions of the U.S., Blinken, Sullivan, declared Zionists, okay, that they wouldn't say, okay, we know what the president has said, but forget about it. This is your chance. You got 4 weeks. Go ahead and do it. I don't know what's going to happen.
Ray, in terms of Iranian attack on Israel, how do you see the current phase of the conflict, considering what's going on in the United States and Israel? Are they going to retaliate, and how they're going to do it?
Well, the Israelis are not in a very comfortable position unless they're convinced they can depend on the Blinkens and Sullivans of this world to support them. Now, they have a really bad omen that they have to contend with, and that is that our military overrode Blinken and Sullivan. Well, Blinken at least. Blinken wanted to authorize use of those longer range missiles against Russia proper. He had it all set up. It was a done deal. And Stormer, the British Prime Minister, came into Washington expecting to get approval. He is said to have the targets in his briefcase and all. What happened? The day before, Mr. Putin made a big announcement about changing. He made a big announcement that this was not going to happen. Was that the day that? Yeah, that was the day he announced that there would be a new change
nuclear
in the
doctrine.
nuclear. Yeah. So I get a little mixed up here, but yeah, that was the 12th. So now, also on the 12th, the military spokesman for the Pentagon, a general, major general named Pat Ryder, said, "Look, Secretary of Defense Austin has already said that we don't have so many ATACMS missiles, that the range is not really good enough to do much harm in Russia because the Russians have already moved a lot of their equipment and their aircraft and so forth well beyond that range. And, this we think that we should just kind of do what we've been doing without authorizing these other things." Now, that was made clear on the 12th. I guess nobody told Biden until the morning of the 13th. It was Friday the 13th, kind of a ill omen right there, okay? But Biden was told that morning that no, the military is not going to agree to this, overruling Blinken. And in the event, when Stormer came, Bush was fit to be tied. You could see how angry he was. He was not really comfortable with this, but he told Stormer, "Look, put your target list away. We are not going to approve that." Now, why did I go into all that? Now, I went into all that because that's if the Israelis are looking on, and if these two American four-star generals that visited Israel within the last 2 weeks said to the Israeli counterparts what I think they said: "Look, don't get into a war with Iran. We're not ready for it. We don't want it, and we're going to tell President Biden, don't do it." Now, the Israeli military said, "Oh, that's good because we don't want this." But is President Biden going to go with you, or is he going to go with Blinken? And at least the military will be able to say, "Well, last time on Ukraine, he went with us because it's a military issue. And this time we're hoping at least you can be assured that our advice to Biden will be, don't do it. Don't let the Israelis think they can get away with all this." And so what'll happen there, I think the Israeli military are really, really reluctant to get involved in all this. They're going to take orders, I think, no matter what Netanyahu decides to do. But their reluctance has to be a factor in all this. And maybe between them, the American military and the Israeli military, maybe they can talk some sense into their leaders, because Iran has already demonstrated what it's capable of, what its missiles can do. I'm not familiar with the latest readout of how much damage that air base, or those air bases, plural, in Israel suffered. But those missiles got through. Iron Dome showed that, it was a really nice system 10 years ago. It's not so good against hypersonic missiles. Even I think Biden admitted about a year ago in an an uncommon remark that there's no defense against hypersonic missiles. That happens to be true. Iran has them, Russia has them. And not only that, and this needs to be mentioned, the Russians, by all reports, have been pouring very sophisticated air defense systems into Iran. Okay. Now, would they be able to protect all the sensitive sites in Iran? Probably not, but most of them, you know. And this is a token of Russian involvement in Iran that is atypical it's ahistorical. They haven't really come to the fore in delicate circumstances like this. And besides all that, the Russians and the Iranians have been working on a mutual treaty that is tantamount to a mutual defense treaty. It's one of these comprehensive treaties that they don't like to call a defense treaty, okay? It's like the one Russia has with China. It's all but pretty much worked out, and the latest report said it's going to be concluded, actually signed, in Kazan at the BRICS summit just, 3 weeks from now, okay? So what does that mean? Well, that means Russia is really a patron of Iran in a way that has not been the case before. And so does the United States want to contend with that? They want to, let's say they try to fire off missiles at Iran, or the Israelis do, and they don't have very much luck. I mean, not only is that going to be an embarrassment to the U.S. military, but, you know, Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed, they want to sell this stuff abroad. That's one thing that comes out of Ukraine. I mean, this stuff doesn't work very well. I mean, maybe the Russians are going to steal the market on many of these things. That's a side issue, of course. So, bottom line here is this is really, these weeks, the next 4 weeks before the election, are the ones where Netanyahu is going to decide, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Even if chances are only 50-50, that what Biden is saying now is just rhetoric and that he'll support us full bore, now go for it, guys, go for it. Then, if the Israeli military don't resist that, who knows what they'll resist it, they'll go deep into Lebanon and may even try to provoke Iran into an exchange which would unleash a major regional war. I don't think Iran's going to be provoked. I think that not only Russia, but the rest of the BRICS countries, and Iran, by the way, is a member of BRICS now and of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're really pretty much in bed with these folks. Now, they're all telling, I'm sure they're telling Iran, look, cool it at least until the BRICS. We'll all get together and we'll figure out what we do collectively. That's pretty much how BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation, how they work. They do this stuff collectively. It's a bizarre way. Maybe it's Asian or something, but it makes sense. Now, I think the other thing is China. And China depends greatly for oil from the Gulf area. I mean, like really greatly. I mean, maybe they get more from Russia, but man, if that Strait of Hormuz were messed around with, this Chinese economy would be in dire straits, I'm told. So what does that mean? Well, that means the Chinese will be trying to reassure the Iranians as well that they're behind them, but please cool it. You've done a really good job of showing your prowess now. When you only gave them 1 or 2 hours of alert before you fired his missiles, well, it worked a lot better than when you gave them 2 days, right? So they know what the threat is. If they do it anyway, still cool it. We'll give you the AAA, the anti-aircraft missilery and so forth to help you contend with it. So I don't know what's going to happen in the next 4 weeks, but these are the crucial days, it seems to me. And of course, Biden's he's the president for until January 20th. So that has to be taken into consideration too. But he's a lame duck, and there's nothing from the Democrat side that would indicate that that they're going to they're going to undermine him except for the crazies, and those are the Newlands and the Sullivans and the Blinkens.
The president of Iran, Pezeshkian, was talking about in the aftermath of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. Washington was talking with them and giving them promises that they're gonna bring a ceasefire to the conflict in Gaza in order, if Iran exercise restraint, if not respond to Israel. And right now, when they did that, we had the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. And Ray, the problem is how the United States is going to behave in the Middle East, because the way that we're witnessing right now, the policy of the United States, it doesn't seem to be functional. It doesn't seem to have any sort of strategic objective, even in the eyes of these neocons in Washington. And how, in your opinion, at the end of the day, are they capable of controlling Netanyahu?
No. The people running our policy, Blinken and Sullivan, are not able to control Netanyahu. That's why I did the analogy between Ariel Sharon and what Brent Scowcroft said about him. Just look at his demeanor, Netanyahu's, before the UN. I mean, that was, in my view, chutzpah on steroids. Okay, everybody's leaving. It doesn't matter. Why? Because he's got the American president wrapped around his little finger. He's got him mesmerized. Scowcroft's words. It doesn't change. Even Netanyahu, when he thought the camera was off, right? 2001. He's in some living room and he's saying, "Oh, the Americans, for God's sake, don't worry about the Americans. They will always be led to do what we want them to do." Would you believe that 80% of the Americans support us? I mean, that's absurd, period, end quote. His words, 80%, that's absurd. That's 2001. Now, it hasn't changed very much. Witness the fact that Biden, first thing he did was hop on a plane and go hug Netanyahu after October 7th, right? The hold that Israel has on our body politic, and again, Congress as well as the administration, is such that these people may go off half-cocked with the support, tacit or otherwise, of the Blinkens and Sullivans of this world, who just as soon, do something like this dramatic, because otherwise Ukraine's going to be in the news, and guess what's happened in Ukraine? Ukraine has just lost Vuhedar, one of its major strong points. It's amazing that the Ukrainians are surrendering and they're being captured and so forth. The thing in Kursk has gone really sour. So at least these next 4 weeks, if they can keep the pot boiling in the Middle East, people won't realize that this escapade in Ukraine was a fool's errand from beginning to end, and that it's largely Biden's fault.
The other aspect of the Middle East is how Russia is involved in the Middle East, and the way that they're involved in Syria right now with Iran, and what would be, because yesterday we learned that Netanyahu was so desperate to talk with Putin. It seems at the end of the day he couldn't talk with him. And in your opinion, when they're just acting against Russia in Syria, what he wanted to do to Putin, and why Putin was not interested in talking with him?
Well, Nima, this is a really good point, and people should go back history for a little while. And in broader terms, after we came out of the first Gulf War there in 91, we had this attitude concentrated in that Wolfowitz doctrine, where we wouldn't let anybody deal with us, and we're going to be the the main power, and we would prevent anyone from getting anywhere near our main power status, right? Okay. Well, in 2015, that went down the drain. Okay. After the first Gulf War, one of the generals who used to be head of NATO went to Wolfowitz, and he said, Clark was his name, Wesley Clark. He went to Wolfowitz and he said, Paul, way to go. Big victory. Wow. What did you learn? What was the big lesson that you learned? And Wolfowitz, without batting an eye, said, we learned that we can do this stuff and Russia won't stop us. Whoa. Okay, it's 1991. Then Wolfowitz, he's a little extreme, but he's smart, right? And he says, look, there will come a day when Russia will be able to stop us. And so we got to do everything in the interim to make it hard as hell for them to stop it. Okay. So 2015, the U.S. is running insurgents, running affiliates of Al-Qaeda, mind you, in Syria. The President of the United States, Obama, says Bashar al-Assad has to go. Okay. So, and then there's a false flag attack in 2013, and all of a sudden, all those neocons want to do a war against Russia, and Obama goes up to St. Petersburg for a summit, G7 or whatever, G8 in those days, and Putin, in a word, pulls his chestnuts out of the fire and says, "Look, we can get the Syrians to destroy their chemical weapons." That happened. Okay, so that's 2013. 2014, we had the coup in Kiev. 2015, it looks like these ragtag dissidents who are fighting Bashar al-Assad may win. I mean, they got the whole country kind of decimated in many ways. And so the Russians, actually, it was Putin himself, called Obama over at a UN session there, September of 2015. And he said, "Now, Mr. Obama, just want to tell you that we are going to support Bashar al-Assad. We don't like what you're doing. You're doing sort of it's just short of war. But we know chapter and verse of what you're doing. You should know that we're sending aircraft and actually some troops into Syria as I speak, and we don't want any trouble with you. So we're asking you to appoint your secretary or your Secretary of State, John Kerry, to talk with Lavrov, our foreign minister, and see if we can't get some sort of ceasefire in Syria so that we can deal with this thing, because we don't want an open confrontation. But just so you know, we're in there, and we're in there in a way that we never have been before, overtly. Let's do something to deconflict the aircraft that are flying all over them." So they did that. The militaries deconflict all that. And Kerry and Lavrov worked for 11 months. Okay, 11 months. And they came to a ceasefire. Okay. Ceasefire at referendum, Putin and Obama. I mean, they were personally involved in saying, yes, this is what we want. We approve this ceasefire. 9 days later, the U.S. Air Force bombs a fixed Syrian position that had been there for a year. Okay, it was no mistake, sabotaging the ceasefire. So what did this mean? Well, that meant that Kerry, even if he was well-intentioned, was not really able to make his weight felt against what our military wanted to do, and CIA as well, in Syria. So there's an idea of how even agreements supervised by and approved explicitly by Putin and Obama were just shred to smithereens. So what about Syria? Why? I mean, after the experience in Iraq, you would think that we'd be more perspicacious, right? Well, we know what about Syria. You know, at a time when things were really going really helter skelter, the head of the New York Times bureau in
Ray,
Jerusalem.
sorry
Yeah.
for interrupting you. I know where are you going. Just telling you today Russia was talking about that they're going to do a false flag operation, NATO together with Ukrainians in Syria with chemical weapons. Go ahead. I know where
Wow.
you're going.
History repeats itself. Okay, I hadn't seen that. Well, maybe just a couple of details then. What happened was Obama was set up. Okay, he gave a speech on Syria on August 20th, 2012, and the Q and A's, and somebody slipped them a piece of paper at the end of the Q and he read it, and he said, "Oh, so the question is there nothing that Syria would do that would change your mind about getting involved in there militarily?" And he read the read the answer. Well, yeah, if Syria used their chemical weapons, or if they even moved their chemical weapons, well, that would change my calculus. That would change. That would be different. Okay. So Obama's reading the script given to him by Hillary Clinton's folks. Okay. August 20th, 2012. August 21st, 2013, there's a chemical attack outside of Damascus blamed on, guess who? Bashar al-Assad. They're not only moving them, but they're doing them. Kerry gets up on the 30th or thereabouts of August, again, 2013 now, and he said, "Oh, this is terrible. This is Bashar al-Assad did it. Bashar al-Assad did." And we know from Ted Postal and from other people who looked at it, it wasn't the Syrian army that did it. It was these ragtag groups that the U.S. and Turkey and others supported that did it. So that was a false flag right there. It's worth mentioning because Obama was under great pressure to respond because he had promised just the year before, right? He was mousetrapped into just use, and then so the false flag attack. You get the idea. Well, what happens is he says, Obama says, "Do I really want to start another war?" And Obama is smart. He says, "I know all these advisors, every one of my advisors said, got to do this. But so he says publicly, I think I need to get congressional approval for this." My God. Well, hello, that's what the Constitution says. But the neocons were up and up. You don't need a congressional opinion. It was crazy. It was really crazy. And on the 1st of September, I believe it was, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee with Bob Menendez in charge, they all voted, yeah, we have to go in there and we have to do what we promised to do to take care of Syria. And John Kerry is egging them on. Well, 2 days later, Obama goes up to St. Petersburg, prearranged summit of some kind. And Putin takes him aside. Look, you don't want to start a war there, right? No, I don't want to. Okay, I got a solution for you. We've been talking to the Syrians. They're going to destroy their chemical weapons on a ship outfitted to such destruction. You have 2 of them. If you let us use them. And under UN supervision. You don't have to do a war, Mr. President. Obama says, really? And Putin says, yeah. Look at the TV tomorrow. The Syrian foreign minister is going to mention that. He did, and that prevented an open war on Syria. Okay? Now, just as a codicil here, where's John Kerry in all this? Key. John Kerry was not with Obama. He was traveling around Europe, drumming up support for an open challenge, an open war with Syria, right? So he's in London 3 days after Obama and Putin agree this is the way to go, no war. And he's asked at a press conference, this is Kerry now, John Kerry. He's asked at a press conference, now, Mr. Kerry, is there nothing that Bashar al-Assad could do to prevent prevent the West from making war on him? And Kerry says, and this is a quote, Nima, well, he could destroy his chemical weapons. I mean, he could. I mean, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Kerry gets on a plane to get back to Washington. Obama calls him. Oh, John, I forgot to tell you. Forgot to tell you that we agreed we're going to destroy those things. They're going to, and I want you to go back to Geneva as soon as you have a chance to shave and conclude this agreement, which Kerry did. Now, why all this? Well, the key was, as I started to mention, this New York Times bureau chief in Jerusalem. She's asking her Israeli counterparts. One of them was, what's his name here, an previous ambassador to the US. These are high people. When you're New York Times chief, you get to see these high people, okay? And she said, what's your objective? What do you see? What would your be her words, your preferred outcome in Syria? And Allon was the name of one of these people. He's very prominent now, being quoted in Haaretz and other places. So he says, now, Jody, it was Jody Ruderin. She's the New York Times chief. So he said, Jody, this is hard to say, but our preferred outcome in Syria is no outcome. Traduisez, s'il vous plaît, says Jody. Look, as long as the Shia and Sunni are at each other's throats, we have nothing to fear from Bashar al-Assad or anybody else in Syria. So that's the name of the game, Jody. Our preferred outcome is no outcome. Let them kill each other off. Let them bleed to death. That's our preferred outcome. So that was Syria back then, and that was before the Russians went in. It was 2013. As Russians are in 2015, the scene changes because, contrary to what Wolfowitz said back in 1991, it's no longer possible to do anything you want, and the Russians won't stop us. Well, in Syria, the Russians did stop us, and mirabile dictu, it's miraculous. But Bashar al-Assad is still in power, despite the fact that Obama said Bashar al-Assad's got to go many years ago. So that's what Syria is all about. Now, of course, Syria has the Golan Heights. I've been up in the Golan Heights. People don't realize what a commanding view and perspective you get on everything to the north there. It's really a strategic place. It belongs to Syria. The Israelis occupied it, and of course, it was Donald Trump said, "Okay, you can have that. We recognize that you're an ex-war. It's not Israel under international law." But you started talking about Syria, and did you have an immediate? Oh yeah, you said there's going to be another false flag. Who says that? The Russian?
Russians are talking about this just today.
Well, I can see why. I think your audience can understand why they might fear that this would happen, wouldn't they? Where the Israelis have these kind of connections, and a false flag can emerge at any time. And I dare say, if Blinken gave a blink or a nod, they go off half cocked, and so that's another powder keg right there. And all this in the 4 weeks. I used to say 6 weeks and then 5 weeks. Now it's just 4 weeks, right? Or 1 month before the election. So, yeah.
Ray, it doesn't seem that the conflict in Ukraine is going to be over in the near future. And how do you see it, in your opinion, in the eyes of Russian? Is the same case as I was talking about, or they're seeing it as they can put an end to this conflict as soon as possible?
Well, it's hard to know, Nima, but based on what I think the Russian approach would be, they're in the catbird seat. Putin can decide how quickly he goes to the Dnieper River. Now, with the seizure of Luchedar and the next one that's going to be Pakros, is it?
The crofts.
Yeah. That's freeway. They could go there. Now, I think that they're probably informal contacts, that is, back channel contacts between the Russian Defense Ministry, Belousov, the Defense Minister, and Austin. They've worked pretty well in preventing Biden from approving these longer range missiles, because this is the way it works. Not only did Putin say that on the 12th of September, but I'm sure that Belousov called up, 90% sure, they called up Austin and said, look, our president has made some remarks today. He's not bluffing. Could you repeat after me, Secretary Austin? He's not bluffing. Oh, okay, he's not bluffing. No, and that changed it. Now, what happens with respect to Ukraine? Maybe I'm way out on a limb here, but the behavior of Putin so far indicates that he doesn't want any more of Ukraine than he's already got. For God's sake, he cleans out the Donbass. Maybe he takes 2 more provinces besides the 4 that he's already incorporated into Russia. But, it's time for negotiations. He hasn't leveled Odessa yet, okay? And way back, 2 years ago now, he made a broad hint. Maybe it's worth mentioning this. Somebody asked him at a press conference, one of these 3-hour-long press conferences, Mr. President, I'm thinking of traveling to Odessa, and I'm wondering, do you think I should apply for a Ukrainian visa or a Russian visa? Pretty clever, right? So Putin's up to this, and he said, Odessa, a beautiful city, the pearl, just a wonderful, yes, you should go, yeah, because, Odessa, it could be what do you call it? Oh, yeah. It could be a яблоко раздора. Яблоко in Russian is apple. Раздор, discord. Okay, so you go back to the Trojan War. An apple of discord. Or it could be a way of achieving mutual aims peacefully. So Odessa presents that possibility. Now, that was a broad hint. It was at the end of 3.5 hours, okay? So maybe the people that work for Biden now don't stay for 3 hours or even 3.5 hours. But that was our job. We had to listen to everything and make note of stuff that seemed to be broad hints, okay? So what am I saying? I'm saying that I think Putin would be willing to do at least back channel things before the election and see what the bidding is, and just see if Biden is still compos mentis, and see whether it would profit Russia to go any farther right now or not. I think right now Russia is on the record as saying, look, we're willing to negotiate, but not with a guy who's outlived his tenure in office. He's not even elected president anymore. We're not willing to talk on those terms, like joining NATO and all that stuff, but willing to talk with responsible people. Now, will Biden opt for that? Well, all my friends who know more about domestic policies here in the U.S. say no, he never go through that. But that's an option he has. And I think, by and large, Putin will probably be just as restrained as he has been. As I say, he's conquering. The Ukrainians are giving up. They're being captured in droves. Zelensky, I've been saying this for a while, but is he really long for this world? I don't know. I mean, that caper in Kursk, where all those troops, or most of them, are now encircled, they're going to be either killed or captured. That was really, you want something really stupid, that was it, because those troops are the best ones they had, and the only reserve to prevent what's happening now in the Donbass. So yeah, on Ukraine, it's going to be difficult in the next 4 weeks for anything significant to happen. And just as a codicil here to say, we thought that neither of the vice presidential candidates knew enough about Ukraine to realize some of the major factors that they've been misled into believing. And so, veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, maybe you saw our memo. We came out a week ago and we said, look, just in case you didn't know this, I mean, there are two really important things. Okay, the attack into Ukraine by Russian forces was not unprovoked. And this is why we say that. The Secretary General of NATO has admitted that. Okay, I mean, it was a faux pas, but he's admitted. Now, lots of other. And the other thing is that there's no evidence at all. No evidence at all. And I was on a Zoom with Jack Matlock, former ambassador to Russia, yesterday, and he was saying this is exactly right. There's no evidence at all that Putin won't stop, but will take Poland and then try to take the Baltics. And before you know it, he'll be on the English Channel. Give me a break. There's no evidence at all. It doesn't make any sense, okay? And for people to be bruiting this about, the president himself, the presidential candidate now. So we thought they should know, and the proof is in the pudding, because when people say Putin won't stop with Ukraine, well, Nima, as you and your audience know, he did stop. He stopped 6 weeks into the war when he was assured in those negotiations in Istanbul that Ukraine would give up its aspirations to join NATO. There would be a ceasefire. They'd work out the rest of the stuff later, okay? And that was overruled not only by Boris Johnson of the UK, but by, we know now, Victoria Nuland, who, with a smirk on her face, told an interviewer 2 weeks ago, oh yeah, well, you know, we looked at that, and they came to us to ask for some advice, and we discouraged them. We discouraged them from having the ceasefire because we didn't like some of the terms in the annex. So, you know, we don't have to prove that anymore. We have the Madame Nuland, Madame Defarge, if you will, saying, look, yeah, that's what we did. We discouraged them. Well, discouraged them, of course, they told them not to. Boris Johnson is quoted by the Ukrainian negotiator as having said, no, let's fight them out. Let's keep fighting, okay? Well, we know that Johnson was there on the 8th of April. What most people don't realize is that the CIA director, John Brennan, was also there. Now, there was a brief report. I'm not telling you any secrets in this group. It's a brief report in the press, completely overlooked. But that's when the Ukrainians were told, no, we're going to fight them. We're going to give you all the weaponry you need. Just wait. We'll get you equipped. We'll get you trained. And then we had those faux Minsk agreements, which the Germans or the French were supposed to supervise. And, you know, if Putin feels like he was double-crossed, well, he played along with the Minsk agreements, and of course they came to naught. And there again, you have chutzpah, chutzpah on steroids, with Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande, the two leaders of France and Germany at the time, bragging about the Minsk Accords. They were supposed to give some autonomy to the Donbass. Oh, we just used that so that we could train and equip and get the Ukrainians ready to fight this war. So, you know, and they admitted that openly. What's Putin going to do now when he has his generals and his admirals behind him and say, are you going to trust these guys again? No, you're not going to trust them again. You're going to have to proceed forward without alerting them or without provoking them to such a degree that they'll use weaponry that we really don't want used. But by the same token, we'll tell them, look, there are new red lines for us too. Don't use your weaponry the way we don't want them to be used. One footnote here. It's interesting to me that Putin decided on this particular set of circumstances to announce the revision of their nuclear policy. I mean, after all, there aren't too many ATACMS. There aren't too many storm shadows. There aren't too many scalps, which is the French version. Okay, and they don't reach very far into Russia. What? Less than 200 miles, for God's sake, you know? And as has been already said, the Russians have moved most of their stuff well out of range. So why did Putin pick this particular juncture to say, look, we don't want to have to shoot these things down anymore. We want you to stop it. And they can't stop it. They can't do it without you authorizing them, because there's proprietary software and stuff in these weapons, storm shadows in particular, and the scalps. Okay, so why do you draw the line there? And the answer I'd give is, I don't know. I think he didn't want to be an extremist. He didn't want to go to the next step, you know, because on the military values here, the military situation, this was not a difference in genus. It was just a difference in particulars here. So in any case, he decided to do it, and maybe it was a function of his generals, and you always have generals and admirals looking over your shoulder and saying, you know, when are you gonna draw the line? And he said, well, this might be a good idea. And thank God he succeeded. And again, how he succeeded, I think he had Belousov call Austin, call his Joint Chiefs of Staff and say, does this make any sense? And they said, no. And they persuaded the president, look, we don't care what Blinken says. He don't know. He's never wore a uniform. Neither has Sullivan. They don't know anything about military affairs. We do. We're very reluctant to do this, Mr. President. We think you should tell Starmer, put his target list away. We're not going to prove it. Now, that has stuck. Now, people say or said at the time, well, all right, he's not going to prove it now, but Biden always changes his mind. You know, we're not going to prove the tanks, not going to prove the fighters. Well, now he'll approve this. Well, I don't think he will this time, not in the next 4 weeks. And even if he did, you know, the Russians have chosen something less than a full-scale war here. These things can be shot down. They're not hypersonic, by the way. They can be shot down, and you know, they're not going to hit very far inside Russia. So it's kind of it's an interesting analytical point to make, why he chose this particular time. And as I speaking aloud here and thinking aloud, it seems to me that it may be that he's finally decided to tell the generals and admirals, okay, all right, this doesn't mean a lot, but let's do it now. Let's throw down the gauntlet now. And hey, Belousov, if you call Austin, tell him that I don't bluff. Okay, so it came out well. Whether that will work on Gaza, on Lebanon, on Hezbollah, on Iran, there you have the lobby. There you have the Israeli factor. My guess, if I have to guess, I would say the military will play second fiddle to the Zionists. Biden in the first instance, Blinken in the second, and Jacob Sullivan in the third.
Yeah. Ray, before wrapping up this session, I'm going to play a clip from Mike Pompeo. These two Russian pranksters talk with him, and here is the responses he gave to them.
You can't let them believe that they get to. This is really a China issue for me. We need to pull the Russians back into a European model, not an Asian model.
Mm. But for you, does it mean that Russia is going far away from West if they're trying to go to China's?
We need to prevent it from happening.
Really? So how we can manage it?
this war stop? Do you and then you begin to bring Russia back in and convince them that they're in a better place with us than them. There's nothing fancy about it.
Yeah.
Well, Nima, if you want my comment on that, I guess I would say that that Pompeo is indicative of what kind of advisors are around now, not only to Biden but also to Trump. People say that Pompeo graduated top of his class in West Point, the U.S. military academy. I guess I would just comment that you can get all A's and still flunk life or flunk logic. Now, here's Pompeo. Here's Pompeo who's saying, we have to prevent them from getting together, the Russians and the Chinese. Well, he's about a decade or two late for that. And, he's no exception. I mean, you have the head of national intelligence, the director of national intelligence, a woman who supervises all 17, if that's how many there are now, intelligence agencies, right? She prepares the president's daily brief. She is in charge of national intelligence estimates. These are the two genres that really count, okay? So she's asked in January of 2000, no, she's asked in December of 2022, how about China? What do you think? The Chinese, Russians, and they talk to, what's going on? And she says, well, yeah, they hold a lot of meetings. They arrange a lot of meetings, and so the Russians and Chinese they like to discuss. They have a lot of meetings, and so we're watching that very carefully. A lot of meetings. Well, I mean, meetings between Putin and Xi Jinping mean something, and there have been more than 40 of them, 40, okay? Now, while people like Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, and Mike Pompeo, former head of the CIA and head of the State Department, have been doing other things, the Russians and Chinese are now joined at the hip. And, the way I learned that was a little painfully, because I style myself as an expert on Sino-Soviet and Russia-Chinese relations. I've been working on it for 5 decades, okay? 60s is when I came in. They were at loggerheads. I thought, and we thought, they'd never stop hating each other. Well, they did, and we were objective enough to report that. So, just about to conjure up some comment having to do with, when we pointed out back in the 60s and 70s that they hated each other, that they were forfeiting all the advantage of mutual cooperation, that they were really weakening one another's hands, each other's hands, if you will. Then Nixon and Kissinger said, well, maybe we can exploit this. And they did. And we got the prime Arms Control Treaty, the ABM Treaty, 1972. I worked on that. I had people in my branch working on that. And I was in Moscow to sign that. So that's how we got that done. Now, that all dissipated when we played that clever game, when Nixon and Kissinger were able to play them off. Finally, they realized when Zhou Enlai came in and more enlightened Russian and Soviet leaders that this was really from hunger, as we say in the Bronx. This is really stupid. And so they got together. And what came back to me now, was starting to say is that I knew a lot of this, and I knew how close they were getting. But I also knew, and I've been reassured by my Chinese analyst colleagues, that China's bedrock policy is Westphalia. No interference in the affairs of other countries. No invasion, no violations of borders. For God, that's a Chinese bedrock policy. And so when Putin went up to Beijing on the 4th of February, 2022, I asked these advisors, I said, well, do you think the Chinese would ever look the other way while Russia invaded Ukraine? And the answer was no, never, never, never. Westphalia. They would never approve this. Okay, so I missed it because I was convinced that Putin was so discreet and perspicacious that unless he had a big brother, unless he had somebody really right backing him up, he wasn't going to start a war in Europe. Turned out that it's easy for us to blame our Chinese specialists, right? Us, we Soviet guys or Russian guys. But that's the way it came out. When he was there, it's very clear that Xi Jinping said, what you got to do, you got to do. And just don't do it before the Olympics are over. I've gone through that before. 4 days after the Olympics are over, we have the incursion into the special military operation into Ukraine. So my Chinese colleagues are still saying, well, I don't know if he really approved it. The Chinese ambassador one time said, no, they didn't approve it. Well, what else is the Chinese ambassador going to say? So the question is now, how close they are. And this is a kind of a long way around to getting to something that has been overlooked completely. It may come as news even to you, Nima. But we talked about the 12th of September, when our military got the word from the Russian military that that Putin is not bluffing, right? And when they announced this, actually, the Pentagon spokesman, and the next day, Friday the 13th, Biden succumbed to his advice from the military. But guess what happened on the 11th? On the 11th, the foreign ministry spokeswoman for Russia, Maria Zakharova, had a big press conference. And what did she say about China? This is really interesting. I want to quote her because you might not believe it if it just came for me paraphrasing it. Russia says it could combine with China if both face threat from the United States. That's a title given this. Here's Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said Wednesday, the 11th of September, that Russia's partnership with China is not aimed at any third country, but the two countries could, quote, combine to respond to threats from the United States. Quote, I would like to remind you that Moscow and Beijing will respond to double containment by the United States with double counteraction. Both of them are quotes. Zakharova said, okay, she said now, U.S. plans to deploy Typhoon missiles, which are already being exercised in Japan, of all places, and Denmark, that these would have been banned under the Intermediate Force Treaty, but they can fire nuclear-capable Tomahawk missiles, which have a range of 1,000 miles. The U.S. did recently deploy them to the Philippines also, and to Germany. So what Zakharov is saying is that they can combine is a big word when you're talking about retaliating or facing a threat from the U.S. So the way I reconstruct this is it was all set up in a kind of scenario where the Chinese would be willing for Zakharova to say, look, we're joined at the hip in a way never before. We are going to combine our response, because if there are double containment practices by the United States, doubly containing the U.S., doubly containing Russia and China, there will be double counteraction. Her words. Now, I asked my Chinese analyst colleagues, wow, in my view, as a Russian analyst, that's unprecedented. I've never heard the Russians advertise this kind of closeness, this kind of combination of actions, if explicitly against the threat to the United States. What do you think? Well, what have the Chinese said? Nothing. Oh, well, do you interpret that? Well, that's because they don't like it. I said, well, could it be because Zakharova checked with them before she said that? I mean, likely. I don't know. So we still have this thing going, whether McGovern is right or not. But it is the fact that China is a major player here in all spheres, including Ukraine, including the Middle East, and that Russia and China will combine their reaction to threats from the United States. That's going to happen with respect to Iran, if it's not happening right now. It's happening with respect to Ukraine. And yes, there's still a lot of rhetoric about China's bedrock, position on Westphalia, that you should never invade other countries. Okay, well, that's okay. But, even in February of 2022, when the special military operation began, Chinese rhetoric changed for about a month and a half. And what did they say then? They said, well, each country has core interests, right? And these core interests cannot be violated. And so, our position is that each country has to do what it has to do to protect its core interests. Whoa, that's not Westphalia. Okay, now they're back to Westphalia. Rhetoric is one thing. The bedrock thing here, and I wouldn't go on this way, Nima, if I didn't think it was a tectonic shift in the relationship of major powers. And Russia and China are in this together. It's 2 against 1. And I hate to use adjectives. I won't. With Pompeo, he's oblivious to it, as was the director of national intelligence, which was asked about this just 2 years ago. They don't seem to realize that China and Russia are in this for the long haul, and they're not going to permit the U.S. to do things that endanger the security of either. And these Typhoon missiles are part of the calculus now because, well, the U.S. is threatening to put them in Germany. And the Germans are saying, oh, okay, well, if you decided to do that, then we will approve that. Nobody in the Far East is going to do that without the Chinese reacting in a very assertive way. So 2 fronts, 3 fronts. I'll finish up with simply saying that when Biden was asked on 60 Minutes a very timid question, Mr. President, do you think with the Middle East going the way it is and Ukraine, do you think you're ready to meet a 2-front war? And Biden said, we're the United States of America, the most powerful country in the history of the world, in the history of the world. End of conversation. Well, Biden still may believe that. God knows what he believes. Blinken seems to believe that too, or is too deep into it now to recognize reality. Sullivan, well, there's some suggestion that Sullivan is listening to the military for once, okay? But that's the kind of mentality you're dealing with, plus the fact that he's a self-proclaimed Zionist. So these next 6 weeks, or these next 4 weeks, and the next until January 20, are going to be crucial. And I don't know how it's going to come out, but if you're Putin and you're looking at all of this, and you're saying, well, when they asked me a year ago what I favored in a U.S. president, I told him predictability. I even told him that's why I favor Biden. And then later I told him in a joking kind of way, and Biden said to favor Kamala Harris, and so now I favor Kamala Harris. Why? Because predictability. No, you don't have to explain that. You want somebody who has their codes for the nuclear things there to be predictable. So I don't know. Putin doesn't have any leverage here, of course. This business about trying to influence the election, you have to try that again. That's a bizarre sort of charade. They never did. They don't think they do have that leverage. They'll deal with whoever they end up with. But my God, the proof will be in the pudding whether whoever comes in can be considered to be predictable. And I'll leave that to current history to explain.
Thank you so much, Ray, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
You're most welcome, Nima. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.